Well, good day, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us on our Unashamedly Ethical webinar, where we are discussing the many faces of whistleblowing and whistleblowers. And it is my distinct pleasure today just to welcome our panelists and also specifically our Master of Ceremonies, Nick Dahl, who I'll be handing over to in a few minutes. We are so excited to be signing off this year with the final webinar, specifically looking at empowering and equipping our members and signees with regards to Unashamedly Ethical, where we are asking people to do the right thing. We're asking people to promote ethics, values, and clean living, and we're asking people to stand up for what is right. Today, we'll be hearing stories from history. We'll also be hearing very current stories of whistleblowers and their subsequent journeys and testimonies as they have gone through this very interesting space of whistleblowing. We are trusting that today will be of enrichment and value to you. We have seen a lot of comments on our Facebook post of the webinar today. Please note that this is a live stream event on Zoom as well as on Facebook, and we'll be posting in the chat the link if you want to invite others to join this webinar today. Also, if you want more information on how Unashamedly Ethical can create a platform for your organization, how we can equip and empower you and your organization to make better decisions with regards to ethics, values, and clean living, and also just to connect like-minded organizations and individuals with each other. We are here for that process, and we certainly want to partner with you and work with you as we try and stem the tide of corruption in South Africa and abroad. It is now my pleasure to introduce to you Nick Dahl. Nick, thank you for partnering with us today, as well as Matthew, as we had some brainstorming sessions on how do we tell the story about whistleblowers, and you wrote an exciting book on this chapter. But Nick, let me hand over to you as you take over proceedings, and I will join in again at the end. Thank you so much.
Whoops. Yeah, thanks for the intro, Harry, and thanks for letting us, for inviting us onto your platform. It's wonderful to be here. Themba seems to have dropped off briefly, but hopefully he'll be back. Cynthia, can I ask that you turn your camera on? I'm sure everyone would like to see you. Yeah, so hi. Here comes Cynthia, and Themba, are you back? Can I ask that you turn your camera on, Themba? Everyone would like to see you.
Okay.
Here he comes. Cool, there's Themba. Maybe you can just move your screen a bit so we can, your head's in the middle.
Is that better?
There we go, perfect. Now we're all here.
Okay.
Yeah, so as Harry mentioned, my name's Nick Dahl. I'm one of the authors of this book, which is called Rogues Gallery. Rogues Gallery charted 350 years of corruption in South Africa, starting in 1700 and ending, well, not ending, unfortunately, continuing, as Cynthia and Themba are aware. So yeah, while we were writing the book and unearthing all these stories of corruption, it also struck us that as long as there's been corruption in South Africa, there have been really brave whistleblowers. And this is something we want to highlight and showcase and kind of just tell people how brave South Africans have been over 3.5 centuries. So yeah, we're going to share some of those stories today, but we're also extremely lucky to have two real live whistleblowers, modern state capture whistleblowers with us, Cynthia Stimpel and Themba Maseko, who have both been in the headlines for all the right reasons of late. So yeah, let's start with Cynthia. Perhaps you can just tell us a little bit about yourself and what brings you here.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for inviting me, and welcome to all our listeners and those watching. I'm Cynthia Stimpel. I'm also an author of Hijackers on Board, which is a book I've recently written and published in July this year. I'm also known as the SAA whistleblower. Just a short overview is that I am a mother, a grandmother, a wife. I'm just an ordinary citizen of South Africa. And I chose to speak out and stand up for an irregular transaction going down while at my at the company I was working for, SAA. So I did not see myself as a whistleblower at the time, obviously, but more just as a focus of telling the truth and standing up for the truth. So the book covers my story, and we will probably delve into it a bit more as questions are answered, but it's more about just standing by principles, our own belief system, and the values that we've been brought up with as a family. Thank you.
Brilliant. Yeah, thanks for being here, Cynthia, and for doing what you did. South Africa's a better place for it. Themba, now it's your turn. We'd love to hear a little bit about you and what you've done and why you're here.
Oh, okay. Thank you for the opportunity. Good afternoon to the panelists and to all our listeners and viewers. The name is Themba Maseko, as you might be aware. I wrote the book for my country, and the title says a lot because my story about whistleblowing is essentially about exposing corruption, defying the most powerful person in the land, the former president Zuma, who was asking me to assist the Gupta family by transferring public funds into their soon-to-be established media company. I defied both Zuma and the Gupta company, and I ended up actually being thrown out of my job as CEO of GCIS and ended up being an unemployed citizen working as a consultant. But I'm also a family person, 2 kids, a wife, who have been supportive to me throughout all these years. And I'm looking forward to sharing my story in some detail, not too much detail in this seminar here, because I'm hoping that people must still buy the book and read the story itself, which is elaborated in greater detail. In short, that is me.
Thanks, Themba. Yes, I can highly recommend both Cynthia and Themba's books. Well worth reads. And then finally, it's the turn of Matthew Blackman, who wrote Rogues Gallery with me. Yeah, just tell us a bit about yourself and why you wrote, or why we wrote our book.
So our book originally started off as really just looking at corruption. We didn't really have the idea of whistleblowers at all to begin with. But as we started writing the stories, we realized that in every one of these stories of corruption, there was somebody who blew the whistle on it. And that these stories were quite similar in many ways. There were similar kinds of people who blew the whistle. They were motivated by similar moral and ethical belief systems. And so, you know, this is something that we kind of almost unintentionally while writing it suddenly began to realize that actually whistleblowers became progressively more the kind of characters that we began to focus on. And it's something that Nick and I have continued to work on post writing the book, is this idea of, you know, what does it take to be a whistleblower, and what kind of upbringing do whistleblowers come from? Are they similar? Are they different in some ways? They are, obviously there are differences, but you know, it is quite a fascinating story. Each whistleblower has their own story, and quite often there are similar lines that run through them. Yeah, it's just quite interesting as to why certain people blow the whistle and why other people seem completely unable to do so. And I mean, one of the reasons, obviously, it is an incredibly difficult thing to actually do. And this is why we're here, to listen to 2 people who actually have been through those, you know, those really terrible processes. But hopefully with a hugely positive result to them.
Cool. Thanks, Matthew. Yeah, so the format this webinar is going to take is Matthew and I have picked 3 whistleblowers from our history, from different centuries in our history. And we're going to tell you a little bit about each one of them. And I'm just going to use those examples as a springboard for Cynthia and Themba to discuss their experiences. And the first one we're going to start with is the first one in our book, a chap called Governor Willem Adriaan van der Stel, who was put in charge of the Dutch East India outpost at the Cape in 1699. So back then, South Africa wasn't a country, but it was a company outpost. So he was like the managing director of the Cape Town office. And the company rules didn't allow him to own larger land than was needed for his private use. So like a couple of chickens and a cow and maybe an apple tree. But that wasn't how he rolled. So instead, he granted himself a huge piece of land in the Hottentots, Holland. You've probably, some of the listeners have probably been to Vergelegen, which remains one of the most beautiful wine estates in the country. So he granted himself this massive piece of land, much bigger than Vergelegen is today. And then he used company slaves, company seed, company livestock, company building materials, company artisans to establish this enormous palatial estate, by far the biggest in the country. Once again, remembering this was completely illegal. And then the best part of it all was that he then sold the produce that this estate produced back to the company he controlled at prices he determined. So, I mean, if you think Zuma's and Kandla was bad, Vergelegen was sort of 20 times worse. So anyway, so it's a flagrant example of state capture. But the really interesting thing about the story is that he was actually booted out of the Cape due to the role of a group of whistleblowers. So yeah, a bunch of farmers who were directly affected by Willem Adriaan's actions at Vergelegen, who basically couldn't make any money because he was making it all, plucked up the courage to put their complaints in a document, which was obviously handwritten, you know, with feathers and ink and all of that, and they smuggled it on a ship to Amsterdam. But the governor obviously had his ways and means, and he heard that this document existed. And he had a pretty good idea of who he thought would have written it. So the first thing he did was he sent his main policeman around to a guy called Adam Tas's house, because the governor was pretty certain Tas was behind it. He arrested Tas and confiscated his writing desk, which is the kind of 17th century, 18th century equivalent of taking someone's cell phone or laptop and going through their chat history. And then he chucked Tas, and in the writing desk, he found the names of the people who had done it. And so he chucked them all in prison, in the castle, the Cape Town castle, in the Donkergat there. He tortured them. He didn't give them food and water. He didn't let them to see their family. He put them in front of a kangaroo court. He got them to falsely confess to slandering him, all sorts of things. He pulled every trick in the book. But he also made the mistake of allowing 4 of these guys to go to Amsterdam to sort of tell their side of the story. And even though the governor had assembled a massive document sort of proclaiming his innocence, the spoken testimony of these 4 whistleblowers trumped the governor's documents in the eyes of the tribunal, and the governor was kicked off to Holland and never returned to South Africa again. So it's quite a scary story, but it's ultimately a happy one. And I just thought I'd ask Cynthia and Themba what their experience of blowing the whistle was like. Did they face the same kind of stuff? I mean, they weren't thrown in dungeons, but yeah, what was it like? Maybe let's start with Cynthia.
Thank you, Nick. Yeah, so mine wasn't as bad as going into a dungeon, but it was equally horrific in that when I first tried to stop the transaction, I did it internally. So it was telling my boss that this isn't the correct thing. It's going against our procedures and our policies, and there is a better way of doing it, and then taking it to the next level and to the exco and various levels. The result for me was that I got suspended. And with the suspension, a letter was sent out to all the staff at SAA to state that I committed financial misconduct. immediately people assume she's stolen money, you know, so no one talks to you, no one wants to know what happened. They distance themselves. So one can relate to that I was literally thrown into a dungeon, but, you know, in figuratively perspective, because no one wants to even find out the truth from you. And so my experience was that, yeah, I was firstly suspended, and through going through disciplinary hearing that never took place, you attend and SA is not there, going through CCMA, so various others, we separated, and I walked away from SAA. The resulting action for me was that I suffered some trauma. I suffered self-doubt, is that maybe I should have kept quiet. And then you go through iterations in your mind, but I had to do this because of this, and because it was the right thing to do, and because it was also a responsible thing to do, that I was a senior manager in the organization. So then you calm yourself down and say, yes, it was the right thing. But around you, things are breaking apart. And if you're not getting the full support, even in the legal system, you find you're hitting a brick wall, because our legal system is set up in such a manner that you're fighting the Labor Relations Act as because the organization is placing before you and charges that you now need to defend. Yet no one is going through the space or the forum or the pathway that says, here someone's disclosed something that is unethical. How do we fix it? How do we verify the evidence and find the truth? But that is totally ignored. It's rather about this person and trumped up charges against them to get them out. So I can fully relate to what happened those 350 odd years ago. The end result was that, yes, I decided that through my trauma, through my experience, my not understanding what hit me when I thought I was doing the right thing for our organization. I'm protecting our organization and I was being loyal to it. So what hit me and why did it happen? That I decided that here's my way of helping other whistleblowers so that we can find a platform, that we can be stronger and support each other, and hopefully influence the current legislation and make changes that we can't have these perpetrators continuing with their corruption. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Cynthia. Great thing you did there. And I mean, it's tempting to think that it's safer to blow the whistle today than it was in 1700. But as the experience of Babita Deokaran a couple of months ago shows, it actually isn't any safer. So yeah, that's a scary thought. Themba, I'd love to hear about your sort of the fallout from your blowing of the whistle. You're just gonna have to unmute yourself.
Thank you again for the opportunity. I think the example that's captured in your book, Captured, is an interesting one, because the perpetrator, Van Stel himself, eventually does get penalized. I mean, he's sent out of the country, but those who exposed the corruption were sent into dungeons, et cetera, et cetera. It's an important example, and some similarity there with my story is that, I mean, when I initially defied Zuma and the Guptas, it was very clear that, you know, Zuma was not going to take this lying down. The Gupta brothers in a telephone call made it very clear that because I was refusing to cooperate with them, Ajay Gupta himself, he would speak to my superiors and they will make sure that I get replaced by somebody who was more willing to cooperate with them. And in a few months' time, in fact, I was replaced. My minister, the late Minister Chabane, called me and said he's received instructions from Zuma to make sure that I am removed from my role as government spokesperson and CEO of GCIS. By the time he came back into the country, he was out on a conference in Addis Ababa. He was back on a Monday, and he called Minister Chabane on a Saturday or Sunday and instructed him to make sure that by Monday, I must not be CEO of GCIS. So the impact was not so much being sent to jail, but I was moved from my job in the most unceremonious way, because the way they did it was that I was sitting in a cabinet meeting and they leaked the story out to say I've been fired as GCIS and government spokesperson, and I learned from it through the media. And when I spoke to my minister went back to Zuma, and Zuma confirmed that indeed I was no longer the CEO of GCIS. So no process, no procedure followed. So I actually fell for justifying or refusing to cooperate with what I considered to be a criminal enterprise. I was then transferred to another department. The minister of that department was not at the cabinet meeting, and he learned about me being his new DG, his new CEO, through the media, but I had to call him in advance to say, listen, I'm your new DG, and he was very upset about the fact that he had not been consulted before I was moved to his department. So after a few months in the Department of Public Service and Administration, it was very clear that I was not welcome. So I decided to resign and leave the public service. So at that stage, I thought I was dealing with just corruption that was affecting my situation in GCIS. But later on, as I was sitting at home, I started realizing that in fact, there was something bigger unfolding in front of the country's eyes, and very few people were aware of what was going on and were even willing to do anything about it. And that's when I decided that in addition to defying Zuma, I wanted to become a whistleblower. And that's when I started speaking out in public and exposing what Zuma and the Guptas were trying to do in terms of stealing money from the public purse. And I blew the whistle in that regard. But impact on me personally is that once you blow the whistle, yes, I was not thrown into jail, but life was made just impossible or difficult. You can't get a job. The private sector doesn't want to touch you because you're seen as a political risk or a pariah or enemy of the state. So you end up not even being able, I was not even able to raise funding to start my own businesses because I was seen as a political risk. So the impact of blowing a whistle in the country was quite huge. I mean, I did not end up in jail, but I mean, the impact on me was quite huge. It's been 10 years since I actually could have something I could call a salary coming into my bank account on a monthly basis. But I still consider Cynthia and myself as still fortunate because, as you know, there are people who have paid the ultimate price, people who have been killed for blowing the whistle and exposing corruption. So we still are going through difficulties, but I think that we're better off compared to those people who have paid the ultimate price for blowing the whistle.
Yeah, thanks, Themba. Thanks for sharing. I mean, it is, as you say, I mean, to consider your and Cynthia's experience as fortunate is fairly a generous description. But yeah, but thanks for doing it nonetheless. And I think it's also interesting to note, I don't know if you agree, Cynthia, but Themba sort of saying that he thought it was just his department at the beginning. But then when he sat at home watching the news and reading about the Guptas and stuff, he realized that he was actually it was one portion of a huge thing. Is that something that also dawned upon you when you that you realized that SAA was part of a bigger state capture?
Indeed, Nick. You know, at the time when it was just my department, I knew there was something happening in the procurement department as well. But because I'm not involved in other areas and tenders, I could only suspect it. And it was with the Zonda Commission, because I watched that daily to find, especially on the SAA issues, to find out what was happening. And I was astounded at the amount of corruption that was happening, like in our technical division, or and more came out in the procurement division, and with our actual purchase of the Airbus. So it was really deep and wide and embedded. So it affected all round. With the Zonda Commission, it showed that from the technical, it affected other divisions in government. It affected Denel. So everybody had a part of corruption. So then you realize how big state capture was, that it wasn't just my little deal. I remember sitting in front of the Zonde investigators, and they asked me to come and give evidence there. And I still said, but my story's small and my amount is small compared to the bigger billions happening around there. And I was told then by the investigators, there is far more than this. Your story ties in with other evidence that they've collated. And it was watching the Zondo and attending there that I realized, yes, it's true. That is a big wide web of state capture.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that highlights the importance of just, everyone being on their guard, because it's very easy to think now it was obvious that state capture was happening, but at the time it wasn't that obvious, and it took the actions of people like Cynthia and Themba and a few others to bring it to light. So I mean, we often say, oh, what can I do against the state? But whistleblowers are proof that you can actually do quite a lot. So yeah, we're going to move forward.
Themba, you have your hand up. Do you want to add something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add something, Nick, about similarities with Van der Stel.
Yes.
Ultimately, he was recalled, as your record shows in the book.
Yes.
After some investigation. I think that's been the major problem in this country, that there's not been sufficient accountability. But with the establishment of the Zondo Commission, I think that all indications are that all those who were involved in state capture are going to be held accountable. And ultimately, because of the work that we did as whistleblowers, the work done by the media, the corruption that was exposed, we actually ended up seeing Zuma leaving office as president of the country. So there's a major similarity there between what eventually happened to Zuma because of his role in state capture and what happened to Simon van der Stel. So that's one addition I wanted to make.
The other similarity is that Van der Stel was recalled, but he didn't die a poor man like the Guptas. So he went back to Holland, but he died a wealthy man. So we're going to move forward about 200 years to the 1890s, and Matthew's going to tell us a little bit about two of South Africa's most famous people. One for good reasons and one for not quite as good reasons. So yeah, take it away, Matthew.
So most people will know who Cecil John Rhodes is around the world. He has a sort of world fame because of his money. What few people realize is just how corrupt he was as a politician, because he was the Prime Minister of the Cape Colony on 2 different occasions, and both times he involved himself in corruption. But the person who in many ways blew the whistle on him was another of South Africa's most famous writers, a woman called Olive Schreiner, who had written a book, who gained fame through writing a book called Story of an African Farm. But she'd come back to South Africa and lived in this very small town of Maatjiesfontein, where she met Rhodes and actually made friends with him, because at the time Rhodes was talking quite a good game about how he wanted to improve Black lives and do the right thing, and he was very engaging. She found him quite a sort of moral figure to begin with, and Schreiner had grown up as a child of missionaries, and she had grown up in this very religious background, and she'd kind of turned her back on religion, in some formalized religion, but not, she still believed very much in things like the Sermon on the Mount, and she quotes that quite often in her works. And as she continued to make friends with Rhodes, she suddenly realized how corrupt this man was, and how everything he said in private was nothing he was doing in public. So when he was Prime Minister, he put through some of the most harmful racial legislation in South Africa that had, well, in the Cape Colony, that had sort of been formulated to date. And she started objecting to his behavior, and she took it out on him in a strange way. So she also wrote, she was a very social being, and she used to write letters, and she became friends with some of the most powerful people in the Cape. And she used to essentially drop little hints to various people to say, look, you know, Rhodes has done this, and I hear that Rhodes has done that. But eventually she started writing she wrote a play, and then she wrote a book called Trooper Peter Halkett of Mashonaland, which was essentially about Rhodes and his corruption. But she was also heard firsthand the first piece of tender corruption in South Africa. So she was standing on a platform listening to Rhodes and a guy called James Siverite talking. And a couple of months later, what broke was called the Logan Scandal in the Cape Colony, which was literally the first tender corruption scandal in South African history. And so Schreiner grew up with this real sense of, you know, in many ways, kind of Christian morality. And that was her upbringing. Her whole life was really based on, and she just could not bear the fact that she had made friends with this, what she suddenly discovered was this very, very corrupt person who was using his position. And I was wondering, with both of you, your upbringings and you know, is your story in any way the same? Did you encounter these people that you initially trusted and then realized, you know, that there's something terribly wrong here? And how did your upbringing inform the processes of whistleblowing? Cynthia, do you want to start?
Go first? Yeah, thank you for that, Matthew. Very interesting. I actually quite admired Olive Schreiner I liked her writing in The African Farm. And with Rhodes, though, I've read there's a story about Rhodes' history, and it comes out very strongly how he was shrewd and he tricked people into one major tribal chieftain, where he tricked him into taking his land. So he's done many shrewd things. So to relate it back to my story and to values that Olive Schreiner had, is that we were brought up by my parents at an early age to always speak the truth was the one, to not take what is not yours. And they were strict with many other ways in the way we enacted, we behaved and conducted ourselves, even in public or in our home. And I'll give you one example, is that my sister and I, during holidays, we used to go and play at neighbors' houses. And the one occasion we were playing with our neighbors' dogs, and we brought them home. My mother immediately marched us home to our neighbors' friends and said, "I'm very sorry, but my daughters aren't taking your dolls. They should not take what not belongs to them, and they can come back tomorrow and play." We were all hurt. "Mom, how could you do this?" But my mom explained when we got home. And with that type of upbringing, we always knew that you don't go and just take what's not yours. You ask if you want something, or you work for it if you need it. And so bring it back to the SAA story. When my acting CFO, which started there when this whole big deal of the BNP went down, was that this new interim CFO came in. Her name was Mezina Hansi. And I won't say that I trusted her, but I saw her first as a woman. I saw her as a mother. And I saw her as somebody coming into a role that was very senior, and therefore, and she's not worked in an airline before, and my role was to give her as much guidance and advice as possible, which is what I did. But she discounted my advice. She refused to listen to any guidance that I gave her. So she made decisions. The first decision was when a board resolution was approved without a client having gone through the request for proposal process. So it didn't go through the tender process, but this client was suddenly approved with her attending this board meeting, and I was told not to attend the board meeting. And then I was called in to ratify this decision. And I felt so sorry for her. And I said, no, I will not ratify it, but let's go and look at the policy. I even sent the policies to her. And I said, let me have a look at the board resolution, and we can rather start from scratch and put the tenders out. And I still felt in a way that I'm helping her think more ethically and giving her guidance. And yet she still went a step further to now get a transaction advisor and get this transaction advisor against the current policies. So yes, so bring it back to one can easily trust, like Olive Schreiner was trusting John Rhodes, but on the other hand is she slowly discovered that there was some other shenanigans that he was behind, and he was being shrewd in the way he was dealing, that he was being backhanded. And that was the same with me. As the longer I worked with our CFO, I realized she had other intentions. She never wanted to follow the policy. She never wanted to do things the right way. And she already had a preordained plan to bring in these people to do the deal. So yes, so it's very hard, and one needs to stand by your principles. And so for me I still say it was my Catholic upbringing. It was my belief in God, my own principles, that when I decided to stand up, I even asked my peer group, my peer managers, to stand together, and they all said, no, we need our jobs. And when I spoke to my family, they all said to me, Cynthia, you know you will lose your job. And I said, yes, but I'm not worth my salt if I cannot speak about this right now when I'm in a position to raise the issue and perhaps stop it. And so, yes, it goes with your very principles and your values and your belief system, that to speak up at the time when you see wrongdoing is happening. So yes, Nick and Matthew, I believe that with Olive Schreiner standing by her principles and speaking to various people who could influence the changes, she did that. And I did speak to many people of influence. I spoke to our executives. I spoke to National Treasury even. And it was slow in speaking out until finally an outside party like an NGO outer took action. So it's never easy. And I'm sure with Olive Schreiner, it took far longer for people to eventually listen, because he was also, Rhodes was a very powerful man. And in my case, although I was trying to help, I felt I was helping and feeling sorry for Pumeza Nahansi, she was also listening and getting her directive directly from Ms. Dudu Mayeni. And she actually said, I don't need, you don't make decisions around here. Board makes the decisions, and therefore I will follow what board says. So it's a very difficult situation to be in. And I believe that one needs to stand by your values if you want to make the difference. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that, Cynthia. Themba, how do you feel? I mean, the one thing certainly about Rhodes was that he was never held accountable for anything. So maybe we are making, you know, when Themba made the last point, maybe we are making progress with things like the Zondo Commission. But Themba, how was your upbringing, and how did you, you know, find yourself amongst your peer group who were maybe sort of misleading you or sort of giving you false ideas about what their intentions were, and
yeah, thank you. This is an interesting question again, for a number of reasons. One, let me start by my upbringing. I mean, I grew up in a very religious family. My father was a staunch Christian and taught us values of Christianity, honesty, and all of that kind of stuff. And I learned very early on about the importance of integrity. But I also in the book link this to my involvement in the struggle, that we suffered, we lost a lot of our comrades, and I relate the experiences of some of my very close comrades who were killed during the apartheid struggle days. So this involvement in the struggle taught me the importance of giving my all to the service of my people, all citizens of this country, and loyalty to the Constitution. So when I went into government, it was a deeper conviction to make a difference in the lives of ordinary South Africans. So to me, corruption and what Zuma and the Guptas were asking me to do was amounting to betrayal of those who had lost their lives, betrayal of the millions of people who are starving and still poor to this day. So it's something that was an antithesis to my very being, my principles as a person, as an individual. And part of the difficulty is that when I defied Zuma and then decided to speak out, that was probably a very difficult moment for me, because as an activist, as a young person who grew up in the struggle, you always idolize these leaders who were either in prison or in exile, and Zuma was among those people. So if you then are speaking out and exposing wrongdoing against somebody who is leader of us and a staunch ANC member even at the time, somebody who's a leader, somebody that you had actually idolized as a young person, it was a very difficult moment. And that was part of the difficulty with a lot of the ANC people who were members of parliament who went and turned their backs on the truth and decided to do everything they could to defend and protect what was taking place within government, defending state capture. And the NEC of the nation of the ANC was also caught up in that kind of conundrum where they were being called upon by civil society and the public to say, speak out against corruption, and we think the leader of your party is involved in acts of corruption. But it took months, if not years, for the ANC to begin to say something is terribly going wrong with our leader, and the time has come for them to actually stand up. But by the time the ANC rose to the truth, I think a lot of damage had already been done. I mean, the effects of state capture were being felt and were still feeling them up to this day. So you then have a situation where people that you have worked with, your own comrades, your activists, and when you speak out, they begin to say, but how can you speak out against our own, against our leader, against somebody who spent so many years in exile in Robben Island? How can you expose that? But for me, it was a matter of principle, because it doesn't matter how much I may or may not have idolized a person. If something was going fundamentally wrong in our society, in our state system, I saw it as my duty as an activist, duty as a civil servant to speak out and expose it, because I could see that, in fact, we're beginning to see corruption finding its roots and taking over and destroying the moral fabric of our society. And I really had to speak out, despite the fact that there's so many people, even to this day, who still say Jacob Zuma as their hero, as their idol, as somebody who would not do anything wrong in their eyes, despite the fact that evidence is all over the place that, in fact, it was under his watch that state capture unfolded. Not only under his watch, but I think the Zondo report may just demonstrate that he not only turned his eyes on it, but he also aided and abetted state capture the way it unfolded. So at some point, as individuals, as citizens, we may idolize people, as there may be people who may have seen Cecil Rhodes as a hero, as somebody who's supported development and improved the lives of people in certain situations. But the truth ultimately comes out. And when the truth comes out, even if it's somebody that you may have respected, it is your duty to speak out and expose it. And that's why I think the role of whistleblowers actually needs to be articulated and emphasized as we go forward, because it is the only way that we can actually reverse the scourge of corruption in our society.
I mean, that is exactly the same story, essentially, of the next person I was going to speak about, and a guy called Reverend Beyers Naude, who was a member of this secret organization, cultural organization called the Broederbond, which essentially controls, really from from the sort of late 30s, or certainly began to control the National Party, and then ultimately controlled the National Party by the 1960s. And they also controlled the NG Kerk, the Dutch Reformed Church, of which he was a member of. And his father had actually been one of the founding members of the Broederbond. But by 1960, there was a World Council of Churches conference in Johannesburg, and the conference came out and said that apartheid was wrong, that it said apartheid was essentially an immoral system. And Beyers Naude and many of the members of the NG Kerk signed up to this agreement that apartheid was fundamentally wrong. But the Broederbond cracked down on them. And a lot of them kind of recanted and said that they apologized, but Beyers Naude decided that, you know, it was his road to Damascus moment. He'd had enough. He believed that apartheid was wrong now. He'd thought about it, and he went and essentially gave all the documentation on the illegal and activity of the Broederbond. And a commission of inquiry was set up into the Broederbond's activity. Eventually, a lot of press and everybody they set up, but the commissions of inquiry were never meant to be secret. But this one changed the law quickly to make it a secret commission of inquiry. The two people who helped out in the inquiry were members of the Broederbond, and you know, essentially nothing came of that inquiry at all. Other than it was a sort of rubber stamp. We live now in a very different period. So it seems, hopefully, and the Zondo Commission has certainly, with the arrest and brief imprisonment of Zuma, it has sort of stamped its authority on South African society in some manner, in a far more effective manner than other inquiries have in the past. Do you think that the process that you guys went through at the Zondo Commission, how do you feel has it got you anywhere? Do you feel like you've in some ways got something off your back, and that this process is going to be a positive one for us?
I think I'm gonna give Cynthia a break. She's been speaking first. Cynthia, take a break. Let me go first. Yeah. The Zondo Commission for me is something that is so vital for the future of our country. I mean, I must just relate a little story that's mentioned in the book, that when it was very clear that in fact state capture was at its height, a number of former DGs, we got together and said we find state capture totally unacceptable, and we called for the establishment of a commission of inquiry, a judicial commission of inquiry, and we sent a letter to Zuma. It was some kind of a petition, which was ignored. But because of political pressure, the Zondo Commission was actually established. So I see the Zondo Commission as something that is so vital, so important, because it's going to do at least two important things for me. One is that it's going to get South Africa to understand what really happened in the country, how and who were involved in state capture, who aided and who abetted state capture. And we then can begin to, as Praveen once said, connect the dots between the problems that we're experiencing today, be it load shedding, sewer in our streets, poverty, unemployment, the fact that many of our state-owned enterprises are on the verge of collapse. We're going to get a very good sense of what really unfolded. And it will tell us the role that was played by politicians, by civil servants, CEOs of state-owned enterprises, by the weak boards that were established to oversee state-owned enterprises, by the role or the failure of the banks to actually identify shortcomings in the financial systems and raise the flag, the role of private sector companies, consulting firms, et cetera, accounting firms. So we're going to get a very good sense of what really happened in the 10 years under Zuma. That's the first thing. But the most important thing for me is that it will set the basis or lay the basis for prosecutions. I know people are saying we will spend more than R1 billion on the Zondo Commission. But for me, a lot of the investigation that was done by the Zondo Commission was so thorough. I know that before I even went to appear before the commission myself, I had to be taken through a lot of investigation. I had to give evidence, I had to provide letters, emails, documents, all kinds of evidence. So my sense is that the Zondo Commission has collected substantive evidence that will lay the basis for prosecutions to unfold. My biggest concern at this stage is just the capacity of the National Prosecuting Authority to actually turn that evidence into concrete cases that can be presented before a court. But I think that the Zondo Commission will make that contribution. Personally, I felt that the Zondo Commission was also an opportunity to give me an opportunity to tell my story in my own words to the public, because all along the story has been told by the media, journalists and analysts and rumors and allegations. And I was able to actually tell my story in my own words. And that also led to me deciding to write my own book. But it also required me to put my story in the form of an affidavit. So it wasn't just me going before the commission to just waffle. You had to prepare an affidavit and detail all the allegations, what you saw, what you heard, what you went through, what was your experiences. And I think it was very important even for me, because one of the things that we failed as whistleblowers is that we never shared our own experiences. So I was sitting in my own little corner, experiencing this depression, this anger, this frustration, this almost economic ruin. It was only when I watched this commission that I realized that there are people like Cynthia out there who went through the same experience. And it was important for the country to know that, in fact, we are going to be able to put an end to corruption, or some processes put an end to put corruption to an end, largely because of the many individuals who were brave enough to appear before the Zondo Commission. So I think that it's an important historical development in our country. And I'm glad that it was done in public, in open, unlike what the apartheid state did with Beyers Naude when they were investigating the Broederbond stuff.
Thank you, Themba. I think you said it all. But yes, for me, the Zondo Commission gave me my voice. And I agree totally with Themba, is that the analogy of a whistleblower is that we're blowing this whistle. And when you blow a whistle, it's loud and clear, and people will listen and turn around and look. So think of a soccer I spoke out, and the media puts me up as this defiant treasurer. Staff don't speak to you. And I didn't get to speak out at the disciplinary hearing because it had to be postponed, and SA was never there. I didn't get to speak at the CCMA because, again, SA was never there. It kept being postponed. In the end, we parted ways. But when I did have a voice, it was at the Zondo Commission. And so I felt exonerated. That evening, when I finished my testimony over 2 days, I felt so liberated. I felt light. I felt that, I finally had given voice to what had happened in the past. So for me, the Zondo Commission represents many other factors. That's just the one, giving my voice. The second thing is that it was a platform where that everyone in South Africa could become aware of the extent of corruption in our country by the mere fact that it was being shown live on SABC. And if you missed it, you could go to YouTube and you could get it. And if you wanted to see transcripts or the evidence, you could go into the website and you could get it. The third thing for me that Zondo Commission represents is that, yes, we've had many other commissions in our country. We've had the Nugent Commission, we've had the Makora Commission, we had the Marikana Commission, many for that. Everyone asks the question, so what's going to happen now? Nothing's happened out of all those commissions. But I have strong belief that there will be action taken out of the Zondo Commission. Reason being, some small thing happened. So the previous president had charges, over 763 charges against him, and he was never imprisoned and never went to court. Here he attempted to not, well, he didn't go to court with the contempt of court at the Zondo Commission, and he was charged. Here was a charge that was enacted, and he had to physically go to prison because of contempt of court by not obeying an order. So for me, it was a small thing. It was like a David and Goliath. The David was the Zondo Commission just using a law, contempt of court, and it stuck home. The benefit of the Zondo Commission, which Themba had spoken so well about, is that none of us go there and we had to have our evidence. We had to have proof. And the Zondo Commission investigators were so thorough that they crossed what I said. They would go and find other evidence to collaborate with what I said. They would ask the question. So I couldn't go there with a lie and that it wouldn't be checked out by them. They were really excellent in that manner. So there were people that came to the Zondo Commission, and you could see that they did lie. There were many, but those investigators have the evidence, and they're going to double check and triple check, so that by the time they have to put this forward for the cases to go to the NPA and for criminal charges to be laid, they have sufficient evidence. So for me, this is what our country really needs. If this should fail right now, then we can forget about saving South Africa, because we've been literally entrapped in this web of corruption. And here's a stance that was taken for people to come up and speak out about what has been happening. And now an opportunity for us as South African citizens to come clean and to stop the web of corruption. I don't believe that there's any country right now that can say that they didn't experience corruption. Every country has. As big as the US is, they have. Europe has, Australia has, New Zealand. So all over, but we should be able to stop it and stem it. Right now, we see that it's like a mafia, the stronghold that's happening behind the scenes. And with the Zondo Commission, I think there's an extreme chance to stop it. We may not be able to stem it completely, but yes, we will be able to help and start fixing what went wrong and putting different legislation in place and putting more ethical people in place to enable us to stop it. So thanks for that question, Matthew. And thank you, Themba, for your extreme discussion on it. I loved it. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Matthew and Themba and Cynthia. Yeah, I think it's worth pointing out that in our history, we've had loads and loads of commissions of inquiry, but I don't think any have been as far-reaching, as strident, as really keen to expose the truth as Zondo. I think it has actually set itself apart. I know people moan about it costing a lot of money and being delayed, but extremely corrupt people. But the only one to spend even a night in prison for anything related to corruption, at least, is Jacob Zuma. So, you know, it's easy to feel despair and to think that the NPA is toothless and that the Zondo Commission and that you know things are worse now than they were in the past. But the signs are there. Even if you know we have bad days, the signs are there that we are actually moving in the right direction and that accountability is closer now than it's ever been. I think we all like to hope that that is the case. So yeah, we finished our sort of examples from the past, but I'd like to sort of wrap up the conversation with a few reflections. Firstly, I'd like to ask Cynthia and Themba. I know Themba's got to catch a flight soon, so he might disappear at some point. But first question is would you blow the whistle again if you knew what you know now? Would you do it again? Do you want to start, Cynthia?
I'll go first. Thank you. Yes, I would do it again. I believe that we need to stand up for the truth. If we don't, we become complicit. And right now, there are many South Africans who are aware in both the private and public entities who have seen wrongdoing, but were either too afraid to speak out. And really, the fear is valid, and I can feel with them and resonate with them and relate to it, that the fear is there. But we need to become more than that fear, because if we don't stand together as citizens of South Africa, we will then have a failed state. And I believe it's incumbent on each one of us as citizens here that if we see some wrongdoing, we need to speak up. And yes, the fear of losing your job or just being victimized and retaliated against is so prevalent that we've had the death of Babita Deokaran. For a woman who stood up doing her job and stating what was wrong because she dealt with the finance and speaking to various people about it and reporting it to the special investigative unit, for her to be killed in the manner that she was killed is something unacceptable. We as South African citizens should not. In fact, I feel that some days I just want to go and stand in front of Parliament and say, do not forget, Babita. It's been now August, September, October, we're going into November, it's 3 months. And yet there's still been no protection of whistleblowers. And so for me, we need to start doing something about that. The legislation could have changed. It has not. Who are they waiting for? Us as whistleblowers to rewrite the PDA? So for us as citizens, we need to stand up, and I believe we need to stand together. Our politicians have been divisive. They're using methods of separating us through racial lines, or through culture lines, or whichever means, through divided wealth lines. It's irrespective, we are South Africans. And if we can stand together and say, we want a more ethical society, and it starts with you and me, that I need to be the person to do it and to make the difference. And if I can influence everyone in my circle to start doing it, we will be able to win this war on corruption in our country. We will be able to become a more ethical society, and we need to bring our children up in that way of being ethical. We cannot allow them to accept what's being wrong. In the school grounds, what do we see? We see the bullying tactics, and those bullying tactics carry on in our boardrooms. So those very weak boards that we've seen in our state-owned entities have used bullying tactics to get what they want. And so we need to start stopping that. Each person must stand up and speak the truth. Thanks.
Thanks, Cynthia. And Themba, would you blow the whistle again, knowing what you know now?
The shorter version of the answer is, without a shadow of a doubt, I will do it again. But obviously, I need to explain that. The first point is You know, if I had agreed to cooperate with Zuma's friends, as he was asking me to do, I probably would be having a beautiful apartment in Dubai and flying in and claiming that I want to be the next president of the country or something like that. But it's not me. It would have been just so contrary to my principles and values. So so in my mind, I have no doubt that if I was put in that situation, I would do it again. The things that I'll do differently. One of them is that when I decided to defy Zuma and his friends, and most importantly, the next step, which was blowing the whistle on Zuma and his Gupta friends, I think I wish I'd spent more time with my family and actually brought them into the picture to tell them that I was going to blow the whistle. And these were the potential risks, so that I prepared them. Not whether I would do it or not. I prepared them. It was a bit short-sighted on my part to just go and start speaking to the media, finding my voice and explaining and exposing what was unfolding with state capture. And a lot of the stuff my family got to know about in the media as I was speaking. So a lesson in whistleblowers is try and make sure that those who are close to you, those who love you, your family, friends, keep them informed, tell them before you blow the whistle. The next key point I would make, again, I would blow the whistle without thinking twice. It is important for us as whistleblowers to share our own experiences with the public so that everybody knows what the risks were. And it's interesting that this conversation is taking place in the context of Athol Williams, who had to run away from the country for fear of his life because of the threats. I think that's an indictment on us as government, politicians, all political parties, civil societies that in fact were in the situation that we're in. And the risk with the situation that we're experiencing, Babita's experience, or what happened to Babita, what happened to Athol Williams, is that whilst it's important for us to make a call for everybody, not just public servants, but people in the private sector as well to blow the whistle, the risk is that the more we share our own experiences, what it has meant, the fact that a Themba Maseko has not had a formal salary for a decade, it scares people. That's the fact of it, is that public servants and employees of companies who are watching things going wrong, not just corruption, just unethical behavior across the board. If they see that, if they speak out and expose, it includes sexual harassment, by the way, in the workplaces. When people see that whistleblowers go through what some of us have gone through, it may scare people from speaking up. So that's the risk. And I think that's the point, I think agreeing with Cynthia there, that we need to find ways of supporting whistleblowers so that those who decide to speak, who see wrongdoing at work, they must speak out, but in speaking out, they must know that they'll find support. The work that Cynthia is doing, the work that I'm also starting to do, to say, let's find resources, let's find money to actually support whistleblowers, their families, paying their school fees, helping them pay their cars and their bonds, et cetera, et cetera. That's important so that whilst they know that it's risky to be a whistleblower, that society is out there preparing to support and defend whistleblowers. And that's the message that's missing as we're having this kind of conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Themba. Very well put. Yeah, I think a point that struck both Matthew and I is that, you know, it's a sad state of affairs when it's more dangerous to blow the whistle than it is to be complicit in a crime. You know, and that's kind of definitely where we were a few years ago and where we still appear to be now. So, I mean, whistleblowers are fantastic and we need more of them, but we shouldn't be relying on them. They're kind of a last line of defense, you know. It's like a lifeguard on the beach or something, you know. You should rather know where to swim and learn to swim and do all of those things rather than rely on a lifeguard to save you. So, I mean, I think you've both mentioned how, you know, we need to, it's about fixing the little things in society and everyone doing their bit to build a more ethical and honest country, you know, and so we can all make a difference. Themba, you mentioned the work Cynthia is doing, and maybe she could tell us a bit more about what she is doing to protect whistleblowers and stuff.
Thanks, Nick, and thanks, Themba, for mentioning it. Yeah, I've started an organization called Citizens of Conscience Foundation, and it came about after I spoke at the Zondo, and I listened to the other whistleblowers, and I realized that they've gone through the same experiences that I did. And one of my fellow colleagues by the name of Dr. Masimba Dawa lost his home. It was because he was dismissed by SAA, by Ms. Dudu Mayeni, wanting him to change and sign tenders which was already awarded, and change it to somebody new, and he refused to do it, and he lost his job. He subsequently lost his home. His children are unable to go to university. And I sat there in the Zondo Commission while he gave evidence, and I was in tears, and I resolved then that I am going to start something that will help people like Dr. Dawa. And so I haven't achieved everything yet that I wanted, because my goal is still to get back Dr. Dawa's home for him, even if I don't get his exact home, but get him enough money to purchase his home cash for him. So that's where it started, and I started reaching out to many whistleblowers and started speaking to them. And what we found, that the initial phase of just whistleblowers getting together and sharing their stories helps tremendously, because you realize you're not alone in this world. You're not the only outlier. You're not the only person that has suffered and walked this path of integrity. And so that's the first step. The second step we've taken is to find legal assistance for them. Currently, there's various, I'm part of various networks that we can get people to have lawyers who are willing to assist. And I've written a paper on how to get funding for whistleblowers. We've sent it out to a few people, but we haven't got positive responses yet. The good thing, though, is people are willing to read and to listen, and have called for a few meetings. And so it's to get the funding, set up a whistleblower fund for whistleblowers. The other area we're looking at is to create an ombudsman for whistleblowers, and we're hoping to get that set up by next year. I think we have the right people now to do it. There's enough interest, and hopefully we can legalize it by next year, early next year. Reason for that is there isn't a platform for any whistleblowers to go to. And my smaller company, Citizens of Conscience, is to try and get people to help them and find the way, because we all suffer differently. We have different repercussions, different retaliations, and we have different needs. And so it's to find out what the needs are and how we can help them to just stay sane where they are at present and not give up. And so the whistleblower fund would be for the financial side. The other part is the psychoanalyst help. So some of us just need trauma counseling. Others would need deeper counseling from a psychologist. Others would need even further, as in a psychiatrist. So it's providing that help. I've been working with a social worker on this, John Clark. We've got a clinical psychologist with us, Denise Bjorkman. We've got, there's others that have volunteered to help. So there are people that we can at least advise whistleblowers to go to and talk to help them through this journey. When we lose our positions and our jobs, the knock-on effect is, because of your financial impact, it's no medical aid. Then how do you go to a doctor when you need it? It's so trying to find pro bono services from the medical health side, pro bono services from the legal side. And that's the type of work I'm working with various people, because I don't believe in creating, starting a new wheel, you know, and just it's rather and reinventing that wheel, but linking up with various networks so that we can collaborate and work with them. Whistleblowers have come to me and I've recommended them to, like, Corruption Watch or Outer or even, various other Ahmed Kathrada, various civil societies that can put in help there, because they would have other expertise that can assist. So yes, so that's the work we're doing. It is long and it's ongoing. What I want to do next is to engage organizations that they need to create safe spaces for whistleblowers, that they all have these ethics hotlines and whistleblower hotlines, but the minute their staff speak out, they are hounded and they're victimized. So the intention there is that if that CEO and those executives believe that in their whistleblowing hotline, they will do what is good and they will create the space and the safe space to speak out. They wouldn't be victimizing their whistleblowers, and that whistleblowing should become the norm. It shouldn't be an outlier. It shouldn't be the one person. It should be everybody speaking the truth. It should be one or two people not wanting to speak the truth. And that's the intention. Once it becomes a norm, your company becomes more ethical. You save the reputation of your own organization. And in turn, that type of behavior changes, and we become an ethical society. So that's what we're working on. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thanks for doing that. It's ambitious and wonderful thing you're doing. Do we have any questions from the audience, Harry?
Well, there's certainly been a number of comments, Nick, and I think we really are seeing support for what Cynthia is saying in terms of some of the people just echoing her statements. Things like the Athol, the saga going on right now. There are certainly a lot of questions in the space, but nothing pertinent in terms of direct questions at this point in time, Nick.
Cool. Yeah, so then, Themba, do you need to get your flight now, or have you got a minute? I have one more question. I know that in some countries they have a fund, like not a fund, sorry, legislation where if you blow the whistle and you blow the whistle on $200 million of corruption, you get a percentage of the money goes to you. Do you think that's something we could look at doing in South Africa? Would you agree with it, or do you think it's kind of misses the point?
Yeah, that question has arisen in quite a few forums. I enter the debate from a different angle. I'm saying it's important to support whistleblowers in whatever way possible, financially, psychosocially, et cetera, et cetera. But once we start attaching a percentage to how much you get when you blow the whistle on corruption, I think that it has, a different negative spin to it, because it begins to, in a sense, commercialize the need to speak out and tell the truth. Not all whistleblowing is about money, by the way. A lot of the whistleblowing in the work environment could actually be about sexual harassment of women by a boss, and women being scared to speak out against that boss. Now, if one woman becomes very brave enough, or it could even be a man being brave enough, blowing the whistle and exposing that unethical behavior, you can't attach a financial number to that. And so that's why I think it's important for us to begin to say, we want to build an ethical society where integrity covers every aspect of our life, be it at work, at home, even in churches, by the way, where there's a lot of whistleblowing needs to happen in the churches as well. So just the need to build an ethical society becomes very important. And once you attach a financial reward for that, I begin to have some difficulties with it. I know that in America, if you expose corruption of this value, you get a percentage of the amount that gets saved out of corruption. And a whole new industry has emerged of consulting firms being established and whistleblowers being paid huge amounts of money. So, I mean, if people start wanting to blow the whistle because they want to become multimillionaires, I think we may just miss the point. The most important point for me is the need to firstly protect whistleblowers to make sure that they don't suffer physical harm. Secondly, they don't lose their jobs. Thirdly, they are given financial support so that as a result of whistleblowing, you don't have your kids being kicked out of schools because schools are not interested in stories. They just want their money. If you can't pay, they kick you out. People losing their houses, their cars, et cetera, et cetera. So providing that kind of financial support to whistleblowers, in my view, is the kind of holistic approach that we need to adopt, supporting whistleblowers without necessarily saying, if you blow the whistle, you become a millionaire. I'm not sure if I fully endorse that approach.
Yeah, so I mean, maybe another way of tackling it would be to get the company that's like been corrupt to pay a percentage into a government fund that's used to support all whistleblowers or something like that,
Yeah, the fund must be done, but it mustn't be a government fund, because once government controls it, I think that we could have a problem.
Yeah, in this country, definitely. Yeah.
The majority of whistleblowing may affect the public sector, and we don't want government to be in control. Government can be forced to contribute and treat this institution as a Chapter 9 body, but it must be run independently, separate from government, separate from corporates. It must be a civil society organization, an NGO that's run by independent people. But yes, private business, government needs to, and citizens, individual citizens, crowdfunding needs to be part of it, because you can't say you support whistleblowers as citizens and yet you're not able to provide any kind of support as individuals to whistleblowers.
Cool. Well, I think that's all I have. Does anyone want to add anything?
Cynthia, did you have your hand up?
Yes, I did. Thank you all. I just want to clarify on the funding or the way the US is working on their current paying out of whistleblowers. So it's the Securities Exchange Commission that pays out, and they only pay out for companies that are listed on the stock exchange. So that's where it works. So the Securities Exchange. And the money that has been defrauded and they can get that money back, a percentage of that is paid to the whistleblowers. So that's how the mechanism works in the States. The second act they have is called the False Claims Act. So if somebody goes and blows the whistle on a company and the evidence is false because they just wanted to blow the whistle and get money, they would be penalized and they would be charged, because that's why they put in the act the false claim. It's a false claim, it's not true, and we've done our investigation, so therefore nothing comes from that. So in a sense, I agree with Themba that there shouldn't be that type of carrot for whistleblowers. And I know the states have designed it over the Securities Exchange Commission. The Netherlands have a different mechanism. They call it the House for Whistleblowers, which covers everything. It covers medical health, it covers financial, it covers protection, etc. And that's 100% funded by government. But the Dutch work differently, and I feel South Africa is a unique country, so we need to design our own. And so in agreement with Themba is that we need an independent type of organization, definitely either run by civil society or a new one set up. And again, I would like whistleblowers to participate in that, because we know what whistleblowers have suffered, and then to make sure that this is run effectively and ethically. And that should be run. I also agree with him that I wouldn't want government to fund it, because there isn't funds for it. But what I would want, and how I see it, how I would, and this is what I wrote in my whistleblowing funding paper, is that if every CEO says that they stand by, they're against corruption, so be private and public, A, and B, that they will stop any corruption in their organization, and they're promoting an ethical, because they have ethics days, they have compliance days, they have all those, and we as whistleblowers are called to speak at those forums. But then they're encouraging their staff to speak up against corruption, but the minute the staff do, they then go and retaliate. This is a way that that very CEO has to put his money where his mouth is, and they donate, because every CEO has their own fund. They got to donate X amount annually to this whistleblowing organization or home, and when they have any whistleblowers, need to come there and we help them do it the right way, speak out the right way, because you want to also protect the reputation of that organization. And if it's one or two people who have damaged through some fraud or corruption, those people should be held accountable. Because in the case of Enron and Arthur Andersen, if you look at those cases, those companies no longer exist, yet they were running quite effectively, and they were adding to the to the economy. So if we have organizations all failing, how then do you grow your economy? So, but it's caused by people who are corrupt and people who are unethical, and no one holds them accountable. So the sense is, yes, there must be the money, but it's got to come from those companies, and then those people must be held accountable. I also think that there has to be some payment made for whistleblowers. The payment needs to be done in respect of giving back that whistleblower's dignity. So if someone has lost...
I think we might be running out of time. Yeah.
Sorry, thank you.
I know you're very passionate about it, and thank you. I encourage everyone to check out her foundation, Citizens of Conscience.
Nick,
Harry, do you want to say something quickly at the end?
Yeah, I want to just take a minute here and just, wow, what an encouraging hour and a half. I want to just first and foremost thank all the panelists for their time and for this absolutely brave act. Throughout this year, we heard from America, from Mark Whitaker, who stood for, was first a whistleblower, but then ended up being handed over to the FBI by his wife because, you know, he was a double agent at some point. And it's fascinating to hear the various stories that, in summary for me, I'm hearing that in a lot of the cases, there's a faith question. There's a question about how were you raised? What are your values? And as an organization, as Unashamedly Ethical, we promote ethics, values, and clean living. Our first thing that we try to do is to say, what can we collectively agree on, right, as values, ethics, values, and clean living? And that's such an important step for us to say, how do we stand together? Because I'm hearing people are isolated. I'm hearing people are saying we have challenges when it comes to our livelihoods. And so for Unashamedly Ethical, I want to just share a page with you quickly and say, well, if you want to join the network of leaders that are willing to take a stand for ethics, values, and clean living, we want to partner with you. And Cynthia, Themba, you guys have encouraged us so much today. Nick, Matthew, I've been partnering with you for a while. I want to encourage us all to take further steps and strengthen our partnerships with each other. We want to create a platform for Themba. We want to create a platform for Cynthia. You all have books available. We will be making those available to our networks in terms of the links where they can be purchased. If you've listened to today's webinar and you feel encouraged to support these fine ladies and gentlemen that have taken this brave step, then please do so and go and support the various initiatives. We'll be making sure that you have access to those links. The second part, as I've mentioned, is Unashamedly Ethical, and we have a form that you can complete and then get a subsequent certificate whereby we say, can we strive to commit as citizens to be entirely truthful in all we say, to be faithful to our family relationships, to do nothing out of selfish ambition or conceit, to refuse to elicit, accept, or pay any bribes, to be diligent without being harsh and striving to be just and fair, to be a peacemaker, to do my work wholeheartedly, to submit myself to just and ethical governing authorities, to remember the poor by investing generously and sacrificially in the broader community, and to collaborate with my peers to impact our community and nations. Now, if you say, this is what I want to do, I want to encourage you to go to www.joinue.net and sign the Unashamedly Ethical Commitment. We want to partner with organizations like Cynthia is putting on the table. We have our own ombudsman service for our signatories that if you transgress or if you overstep on these commitments, we have an ombudsman in process and we have someone that can listen to those challenges. So again, I want to say to you all, I want to encourage you to join this network of leaders. We want to put you in touch with people like Cynthia and Themba and Matthew and Nick. We have 3 things that we want to commit to you as an organization. 1, create a platform for ethical organizations to flourish. 2, equip and empower leaders to be able to take a stand for ethics, values, and clean living. And thirdly, connect like-minded organizations and individuals to form a community that impacts society. So this is our commitment to you, and we trust that you would want to join this network with us. We have just over 7,000 organizations already signed up. We have a footprint in 144 nations with offices in 5 countries worldwide. And so it is our privilege to be able to create a platform for people like yourselves, panelists, and we appreciate deeply the time that you've given. And we certainly hope that our audience has been encouraged by what they heard today.
Thanks, Harry. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much for having us, and thanks, Themba and Cynthia. I hope everyone enjoyed the discussion. I know I did.
Fantastic. We look forward to...
Thank you for inviting us. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Themba. We appreciate you. We're looking forward to our next webinar, and please look at our social media pages and our communication for ways to connect with the panelists. Thank you, everybody.